The day Karen Wilcox discovered someone had dismantled her rain barrel system was the same day Hurricane Eliza dumped 8 inches of rain on Suncrest Estates. She stood in her backyard, mascara streaming down her face, not from tears, but from the torrential downpour she refused to retreat from, and stared at the jagged plastic remains of what had once been her prized water conservation setup. Vandalism, she screamed over a thunderclap, her voice lost to anyone but herself in the storm. This is criminal destruction of private property. Water pooled around her sensible gardening clogs, soaking through her socks as lightning flashed again, illuminating the note that had been taped to her back fence. Karen snatched it, the paper disintegrating in her fingers as she read. Unauthorized water collection systems violate Suncrest HOA Code 7.34. Removal enforced per emergency board action. Karen, 53 and recently retired from a career in corporate compliance, felt something snap inside her, something that had been bending under increasing pressure since her husband's passing 2 years ago. The rain barrels had been Robert's final project, his parting gift to her environmental sensibilities, designed to feed her victory garden through the region's increasingly unpredictable droughts. They didn't even give me notice, she whispered, rage building as she watched thousands of gallons of precious rainwater flowing uselessly down her driveway into the street's overwhelmed storm drains. They just took it. Inside her immaculately organized home office, Karen pulled up the HOA bylaws she helped draft 12 years earlier when she first moved to Suncrest. Before Arthur Is had forced her off the board. Before Vanessa Wellington had taken over as president and started ruling the neighborhood like her personal fiefdom. Code 7.34, Karen muttered, scrolling through digital pages until she found it. Unapproved exterior installations may be subject to review and potential removal. She slammed her fist on the desk. Potential removal following review and notice. They can't just demolish. Her phone rang. Cynthia from across the street, a fellow garden enthusiast. Karen, did you see what they did? They destroyed Herb's compost system too, and Maria's solar lights, all during the storm when nobody would notice. Karen's wet hair dripped onto her keyboard as cold determination replaced the heat of her anger. Who exactly is they, Cynthia? Vanessa hired some new enforcement company. Phoenix Property Protection. They're going around with a new aesthetic compliance checklist. But get this, I overheard at book club that Vanessa's brother-in-law owns the company. Karen's eyes narrowed as she opened a new document on her computer. Well, isn't that convenient? What are you going to do? Karen glanced out her window at the continuing deluge, watching her carefully cultivated topsoil washing away into the street. I'm going to do what I've always done best, Cynthia. I'm going to read the fine print, and then I'm going to make them regret the day they messed with my rainwater. She hummed up and pulled out a fresh legal pad, writing CUM and CURES to HOA Accountability Project across the top in her precise handwriting. Below it, she started a list with a single item. 1. Follow the money. Outside, the storm intensified, but Karen barely noticed. She was already deep in research mode, the same focused state that had made her the most feared compliance officer in the manufacturing sector for 30 years. She had always played by the rules. That's what made her so dangerous. She knew exactly which ones could be bent and which ones, when broken, could bring the entire house of cards tumbling down. The Suncrest Estates Community Center buzzed with an unusually large crowd for a Tuesday night HOA meeting. Karen arrived precisely 15 minutes early, settling into a metal folding chair in the front row. She wore a crisp blue blazer with a small American flag pin, her power outfit from her corporate days, and carried a leather portfolio bulging with highlighted documents. Residents filtered in around her, many nodding in Karen's direction or offering sympathetic glances. News of the rain barrel demolition had spread through the community's gossip channels at record speed, especially after photos of the destruction went viral on the neighborhood's social media page. Vanessa Wellington swept in 5 minutes late, her stiletto heels clicking aggressively across the linoleum floor. She was flanked by 3 board members who avoided eye contact with the assembled homeowners. Let's get started, shall we? Vanessa's voice carried the practiced cheer of someone accustomed to being obeyed. First item. Point of order, Karen interrupted, standing with her hand raised. According to Suncrest Bylaw 2.17, meeting minutes from the previous session must be approved before new business is conducted. A murmur rippled through the room. Vanessa's smile tightened. Of course, Karen. I was getting to that. She nodded to the secretary, who fumbled with his laptop. While he pulls that up, let's move to. Additionally, Karen continued as if Vanessa hadn't spoken. The emergency action authorized to remove non-compliant installations should be addressed as no record of a proper board vote exists in any publicly available minutes. The room fell silent. Vanessa's face flushed pink beneath her foundation. That action was taken under my emergency authority as president. Which doesn't exist? Karen interjected smoothly, opening her portfolio and extracting a highlighted document. The bylaws only grant emergency powers in cases of imminent structural damage or safety hazards. Rain barrels, solar lights, and compost bins pose neither. Several homeowners nodded. Someone in the back started a slow clap that quickly died when Vanessa shot a glare in that direction. Furthermore, Karen continued, her voice steady, I've prepared a spreadsheet documenting the market value of destroyed property across 17 affected households. The preliminary total exceeds $24,000, which well surpasses the HOA's discretionary spending limit of $5,000 per quarter without a general membership vote. Karen passed copies of her spreadsheet to each board member. You'll notice I've included photographic evidence and purchase receipts where available. Vanessa snatched her copy, her knuckles whitening around the edges of the paper. This is ridiculous. Phoenix Property Protection was operating under approved vendor protocols. About that relationship, Karen cut in. I'd taken the liberty of researching Phoenix Property Protection's corporate registration. She produced another document. The company was incorporated just 3 months ago by one Gregory Wellington. Your brother-in-law, if I'm not mistaken. Gasps erupted around the room. The secretary audibly groaned. This constitutes a clear conflict of interest, Karen continued mercilessly, violating HOA bylaw 4.29 regarding disclosure of familial relationships with vendors, as well as state statute 47.52b on nonprofit governance ethics. Vanessa's face had progressed from pink to crimson. You have no right to investigate my family. Actually, as a member in good standing with full access to public records, I have every right. Karen's voice remained calm, almost pleasant. Just as I had every right to install rain collection systems under the state's Water Conservation Act of 2018, which specifically overrides HOA restrictions on EPA-approved rainwater harvesting equipment. She placed a final document on the table, the text of the state law with relevant passages highlighted in yellow. So Karen said, addressing the room rather than the board, I move that we immediately vote to remove Vanessa Wellington as HOA president pending an independent audit of all Phoenix property protection contracts and payments. This is harassment, Vanessa hissed, cornering Karen in the community center parking lot after the meeting had devolved into chaos. You think you can just waltz back in after years of doing nothing and take over? Karen calmly placed her portfolio in her sensible sedan's passenger seat. I never waltzed out, Vanessa. I stepped down from the board when my arthritis made it difficult to attend night meetings. That doesn't mean I stopped paying attention. You've made a serious enemy tonight, Vanessa said, her perfect white teeth catching the streetlight. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Karen smiled thinly. Actually, I do. I spent 30 years identifying people who thought rules didn't apply to them. Your type is familiar. As Vanessa stormed off toward her luxury SUV, Karen's phone chimed with a text from Herb Collins. Emergency meeting at my place. Need to talk strategy. An hour later, Karen sat in Herb's living room alongside a dozen neighbors, many of whom she knew only in passing before tonight. Maria Suarez, whose solar lighting had been destroyed. The Pavels, whose children's treehouse had been dismantled. Cynthia poured wine into mismatched glasses while Herb distributed copies of Karen's research. The vote to suspend Vanessa was technically valid, Herb explained, but she's already called for an emergency injunction claiming procedural irregularities. She's stalling, Karen said, buying time to cover her tracks. Classic move. Maria leaned forward. What's our next step? We can't just wait for some audit that her friends will control. Karen took a sip of wine. We don't wait. We act. She pulled out her tablet, displaying a satellite view of their subdivision. While researching the rain barrel issue, I discovered something interesting about Suncrest's water management system. She zoomed in on a blue rectangle behind the community center. This is our subdivision's retention pond. According to the original development plans, it was designed to capture runoff during storms, then slowly release it to prevent flooding downstream. So, someone asked. So Karen continued, expanding the image to show recent construction. Last year's clubhouse renovation included an unauthorized modification to the retention system. They installed pumps that diverted water to the new landscaping features. The waterfall, the stream, even that ridiculous fountain Vanessa was so proud of. Herb whistled. That's a lot of water being diverted from its intended purpose. Precisely. And guess which company handled the water feature enhancements? Karen didn't wait for an answer. Phoenix Property Protection's first contract with Suncrest HOA. But what does this have to do with our destroyed property? Mrs. Patel asked. Karen's eyes glinted. The Water Conservation Act doesn't just protect our right to collect rainwater. It also prohibits interfering with established water management systems. The retention pond isn't decorative. It's infrastructure, and they've compromised it for aesthetics. So they're breaking the same law they accused us of violating, Cynthia said slowly. On a much larger scale, Karen confirmed, and unlike our individual violations of HOA rules, which weren't actually violations at all, their actions affect the entire watershed. What do we do with this information? Herb asked. Karen pulled up an email draft on her tablet. I prepared a complaint to the State Water Resources Board, complete with documentation. But first, she paused, looking around the room at her unexpected allies. For years, she kept to herself after Robert's death, finding solace in her garden rather than community. Now she found herself leading a rebellion. First, we need evidence, she continued. Photographs, measurements, water usage records. We need to document exactly how much water is being diverted and where it's going. The retention pond is on common property, Maria pointed out. We all have right of access. Karen nodded. We'll need to coordinate. Work in teams. Be discreet. What about our destroyed property? Mr. Patel asked. My children cried for hours about that treehouse. We'll file individual small claims actions, Karen replied. Not against the HOA directly. That would trigger their insurance defense. We'll target Phoenix specifically as the contractor who destroyed the property without proper authorization. The group leaned in as Karen outlined her multi-pronged strategy, assigning tasks based on each person's skills and availability. For the first time since Robert's death, she felt truly alive. The familiar rush of organizing a complex compliance investigation combined with something new, the fierce pleasure of fighting for something that mattered. As the meeting broke up, Herb pulled Karen aside. You know Vanessa won't take this lying down, right? She's got connections in this town. 3 days after the HOA showdown, Karen woke to find her front yard transformed into a swamp. Water bubbled up from beneath her carefully tended lawn, saturating the soil and flowing in muddy rivulets down her driveway. She stepped outside in her bathrobe, garden boots squishing into the sodden grass. The culprit was immediately apparent. A broken sprinkler main, gushing water at an alarming rate. Convenient timing, she muttered, reaching for her phone to call the water company. Before she could dial, a glossy SUV pulled up at the curb. Vanessa Wellington stepped out, wearing designer Wellington boots and an expression of manufacturer concern. Oh my goodness, Karen. What a disaster. Her voice carried to the neighbors emerging to investigate the commotion. Don't worry, I've already called our approved plumbing contractor. Phoenix offers emergency water services too. Karen's eyes narrowed as she noticed Vanessa filming the scene with her phone. How thoughtful of you to notice my plumbing emergency before I did. Vanessa smiled thinly. As HOA president, I'm always monitoring for issues that could affect property values. This much water could undermine your foundation, you know. Might be a code violation. By noon, Karen's yard resembled an archaeological dig. The Phoenix contractors had torn up massive sections of lawn, claiming they needed to trace the entire line to find secondary leaks. Her prized perennial beds lay in ruins, plants carelessly tossed aside. This will take days to repair, the foreman told her with unconvincing regret. Might need to reroute the whole system. Could be looking at 5 figures easy. Karen stared at him evenly. I want a second opinion. Your choice, ma'am, but no other company can work on this until Phoenix officially closes out the emergency service call. He shrugged. HOA rules. Inside, Karen made 2 calls. First to her insurance company, then to Herb. Within an hour, Herb arrived with reinforcements. His son-in-law, Todd, a civil engineer, and Maria's cousin, Eduardo, a plumber. They won't let other companies work here officially, Karen explained, but nothing stops my friends from visiting and happening to have expertise. Todd surveyed the excavation from the sidewalk, keeping his distance from the Phoenix workers. Amateur hour, he muttered. They're digging in completely the wrong places. Your main connects over there. He pointed to an untouched section of yard. Eduardo nodded. And that's not a random break. Someone cut that pipe. Clean slice, not a pressure rupture or freeze crack. Karen felt cold anger crystallizing in her chest. Can you prove that? Take photos, Todd advised. Lots of them. Close-ups of the cut pipe. And don't sign anything Phoenix gives you. By mid-afternoon, the Phoenix crew packed up, leaving Karen's yard a wasteland of mud and trenches. We'll need to order special parts, the foreman claimed. Might be a week or 2. We've shut off your water for safety. After they left, Eduardo slipped into the yard and examined the exposed pipe. I can fix this in 20 minutes with parts from any hardware store. Don't, Karen said, surprising everyone. Not yet. That evening, Karen hosted another strategy meeting, this time in her kitchen. With no running water, they used bottled water to make coffee while she outlined her thinking. This wasn't just petty vandalism, she explained. This was Vanessa's first countermove. She's trying to drown me in repair costs and inconvenience, hoping I'll back off. So what's our play? Herb asked. Karen opened her laptop, showing the dozens of photos she'd taken documenting the suspicious cut in her water line and the unnecessary excavation. First, I file a police report for vandalism. Then I contact the state licensing board about Phoenix's fraudulent repair. Eduardo will fix it tonight after dark. No paperwork, cash payment. Karen smiled grimly. Meanwhile, I'll let Vanessa think I'm suffering without running water. The community newsletter hit mailboxes on Saturday morning with a splash that had nothing to do with water. Special bulletin. Vandalism wavy heights suncrestic screamed the headline above a photo of Karen's excavated yard. The article by Vanessa herself described a troubling pattern of infrastructure sabotage and pointed to disgruntled elements upset about recent aesthetic enforcement actions. Karen read it at her kitchen table, calmly highlighting questionable phrases while enjoying the coffee made possible by Eduardo's after-dark plumbing repair. Her water was running perfectly now, though she'd maintained the fiction of being without service whenever Phoenix workers drove by to check on the parts order. Her doorbell rang at precisely 9:30 a.m. She wasn't surprised to find Detective Rowland on her porch. She'd been expecting this visit since filing the police report. "Mrs. Wilcox, I'm following up on your vandalism claim." The detective was younger than Karen expected, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing as Karen invited him in. "Coffee, detective," she offered, pointedly using her functioning tap to fill the kettle. His eyebrow raised slightly. "I thought your water was shut off due to the damage." Karen smiled. "Officially, according to Phoenix Property Protection, yes. Unofficially, I had a licensed plumber fix their sabotage." She led him to her dining room, where she prepared what Robert had always called a murder board, an organized display of evidence connecting Phoenix Property Protection to both the rain barrel destruction and her water line vandalism. "That's comprehensive," Rollins said, examining her timeline. "I was a corporate compliance officer for 30 years, detective. Documentation is second nature." For the next hour, Karen walked him through her evidence: the clean cut in her water pipe, the suspicious timing, the excessive excavation, and most damning of all, the Phoenix technician's incriminating comment captured on her security camera. "Make sure we dig up the whole front. Boss wants this to look worse than it is." Detective Rowland took meticulous notes. "You realize this could be more than vandalism. If someone deliberately cut your water line and then exploited it for fraudulent repairs, that's criminal." "I'm aware," Karen said calmly, "and there's more." She showed him the documentation her neighbors had gathered about the retention pond modifications, detailed photographs, measurements, and water flow calculations provided by Todd the engineer. "This is concerning," Rollin admitted, "but it's more of a civil or regulatory issue than criminal." "Except for this," Karen interrupted, pulling out a final folder. "These are the original development plans filed with the county, showing the retention pond's designated capacity and environmental function. And this," she tapped another document, "is the permit application for the clubhouse renovation, which explicitly stated no modifications to existing water management systems." The detective frowned. "They lied on a permit application." "Yes, and in doing so, they compromised a flood control system that protects not just Suncrest, but the downstream neighborhoods as well." Karen leaned forward. "That's not just a code violation, detective. That's public endangerment." As Roland was leaving, promising to follow up with the district attorney about possible charges, Karen noticed Vanessa's SUV creeping past her house for the third time that morning. "One more thing, detective," Karen called after him. "I have reason to believe my home may be targeted again. If anything happens, you'll know where to start looking." Later that afternoon, Karen sat at Cynthia's kitchen table with Maria and the Paddles, putting the finishing touches on their small claims court filings against Phoenix. "Filing 20 separate claims on Monday morning will overwhelm their response system," Karen explained. "Each claim is under the limit that would trigger insurance coverage, so they'll have to defend each one individually." "Will this really work?" Mrs. Patel asked nervously. "It already is working," Karen replied, pointing out Cynthia's window toward the community center, where a news van had just pulled up. Phase 3, right on schedule. The community center parking lot overflowed with vehicles as Karen arrived for the emergency meeting. Rain had started falling an hour earlier, light at first, but steadily intensifying as the storm system moved in. Neighbors huddled under umbrellas, streaming into the building with an urgency that had nothing to do with the weather. Inside, Karen noted with satisfaction that attendance had swelled far beyond the usual handful of participants. Word had spread about both Vanessa's attempt to expel her and the brewery investigation into the water system modifications. People who had never attended an HOA meeting in their lives now crowded into the room, whispering anxiously. Vanessa stood at the front, her usual composure visibly fraying around the edges. Her hair was immaculate as always, but her eyes darted nervously around the room, widening slightly when she spotted Karen taking a seat in the front row. Let's bring this meeting to order, Vanessa announced, her voice carrying a brittle edge. We have a single agenda item tonight. Point of order, Karen interrupted smoothly. Emergency meetings require 48 hours notice under Bylaw 3.2 except in cases of imminent threat to property. The notice for this meeting was sent less than 24 hours ago. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's smile tightened. This meeting absolutely concerns imminent threats to property, she countered. Specifically, the wave of vandalism and rule violations threatening our community standards. In that case, Karen replied, I move to amend the agenda to include discussion of the retention pond modifications that now threaten our neighborhood during this evening's heavy rainfall. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Several people were checking weather alerts on their phones. That's not, Vanessa began, but was interrupted by a loud crack of thunder that momentarily dimmed the lights. In the brief silence that followed, the sound of rapidly falling rain intensified. Karen seized the moment. I believe our community faces an actual emergency tonight, not a manufactured one. She turned to address the room. Many of you may not be aware that the retention pond behind the clubhouse was significantly altered during last year's renovation. Its capacity to hold stormwater has been reduced by approximately 40% to accommodate decorative water features. Herb stood up near the back. I live downstream from the pond. My backyard is already starting to flood, and the storm's just beginning. Others joined in with similar reports. Unusual water buildup in areas that had never flooded before, even during heavier rains. This is ridiculous, Vanessa snapped. We're here to discuss Karen Wilcox's disruptive behavior, not listen to baseless accusations about approved community improvements. Were they approved, though? Karen asked innocently, opening her folder. Because I have here the permit application that specifically certified no changes to water management systems. And yet, she produced the engineering assessment Todd had prepared. We now have documented evidence that the retention system has been severely compromised. A loud commotion at the back of the room interrupted her as the doors burst open. Detective Rowland entered, accompanied by two uniformed officers and a woman in a suit carrying a briefcase. Vanessa Wellington, Rowland called. I have a warrant to examine HOA financial records and all contracts with Phoenix Property Protection. The room erupted in chaos. Above the din, someone shouted, the clubhouse parking lot is underwater. Karen watched as Vanessa's face cycled through shock, outrage, and finally fear. The HOA president grabbed her designer handbag and attempted to push past Detective Rowland toward the exit. Ms. Wellington, the detective said firmly, I also have some questions about the falls. Dawn broke over Suncrest Estates, revealing the storm's aftermath. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a community transformed, not destroyed, but humbled. The emergency sandbag effort had prevented catastrophic failure of the retention pond, but areas of the subdivision resembled shallow lakes, with water lapping at front porches and transforming streets into reflecting pools. Karen stood at her kitchen window surveying her yard. The trenches dug by Phoenix had become channels directing water away from her foundation, an unintended benefit of their sabotage attempt. Her surviving garden plants drooped under the weight of the deluge, but would recover. Unlike Vanessa's reputation, the local morning news played on Karen's tablet as she sipped her coffee. The lead story featured aerial footage of Suncrest, with particular focus on the retention pond and its obviously modified outflow. The reporter stood in front of the community center, now surrounded by emergency vehicles and county water management trucks. What officials are calling a narrowly averted disaster. County engineers say the unauthorized modifications to this subdivision's stormwater system could have resulted in catastrophic flooding downstream if not for the quick action of residents and emergency personnel. The doorbell interrupted the broadcast. Karen opened her door to find Elena Martinez from Water Management, accompanied by Detective Rowland. May we come in? Elena asked. We have some updates you might want to hear. Over fresh coffee, Elena spread out documents on Karen's dining room table. Your engineer friend's assessment was spot on. The retention pond modifications reduced capacity by nearly half, while doubling the pressure on the outflow system. In a storm like last night's, that's a recipe for disaster. What happens now? Karen asked. The county has issued an emergency remediation order, Elena explained. The pond must be restored to its original specifications immediately at the HOA's expense. Which brings us to the HOA finances, Detective Rowland added, opening his own folder. The warrant gave us access to everything. It's not pretty. He showed Karen a spreadsheet detailing payments from the HOA to Phoenix Property Protection, amounts far exceeding the described services, with frequent round-number consulting fees paid directly to Vanessa's brother-in-law. Clear financial impropriety, Rowland continued. The DA is preparing charges for both Vanessa and Gregory Wellington. But there's more. He turned the page to reveal a list of homeowners who had been targeted for aesthetic enforcement. "Notice anything about this list?" he asked. Karen scanned the names. It took her a moment to see the pattern. Every targeted homeowner had either opposed Vanessa in previous HOA matters or had properties adjoining the golf course, where Vanessa's husband was planning a controversial expansion. She was using enforcement as harassment, Karen breathed. Selective enforcement against anyone who might stand in their way. Exactly, Rowland confirmed. We've also found evidence that Phoenix was instructed to cause maximum disruption when removing items, hence the destruction rather than simple disassembly of your rain barrels. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Herb, Cynthia, and several other neighbors, including faces Karen barely recognized. Emergency HOA board meeting at noon. Herb announced as they filed into Karen's living room. With Vanessa in custody and 3 board members having resigned overnight, we need an interim leadership structure. We want you to take over as president, Cynthia told Karen directly. Karen blinked in surprise. Me? But my history with Vanessa makes me too involved in this dispute. Someone more neutral. There is no neutral party left, Maria interrupted. Everyone has been affected by either the water issues or Vanessa's targeting. We need someone who understands both the rules and the importance.